At the moment, we also have guests joining us, Swedish MP Abir Al-Sahlani as well, who's joining us on the broadcast. Many thanks for speaking with Times Now. In a massive show of solidarity, you yourself had also chopped off your hair during a speech at the EU Assembly in France. A fragmented world has united to speak up for the Iranian women currently facing the wrath of the dictatorial regime. So first, let me ask you, how effective do you think that these symbolic protests can be?
Well, I do believe that these kind of actions, and not only mumbling the press releases, are very important for the women in Iran. The women in Iran who has been taking to the streets for 4 weeks time now, shouting on the tops of the lungs that all they want is freedom, human rights, democracy, rule of law, have said that they can carry out their own revolution, this feministic revolution. What they need from us, from the international community, is to actually choose sides. Either you choose side of freedom and the women, or you choose side of the mullahs and the oppressors. And my action, I do believe, and other women's actions in the EU, in Europe, on other sides of the world, are very important. International solidarity is important.
Well, ma'am, you've spoken of how there's a need now for everyone in this world to pick a side. The protests in Iran are only growing. Do you think the courage displayed by unrelenting protesters can bring down this repressive, regressive regime, or at least get the regime to withdraw and put an end to the hijab mandate?
Well, I do differ with you in your analysis and description. This is not about the hijab in itself. It is about the oppression where you make it mandatory, where you think that politics has a say about how a woman is to be dressed. Is it hijab, or is it a bikini or a sari? Politicians does not have anything to say with that. And this is the quest of the Iranian woman, is a quest for freedom, not anti-hijab. So in there, I do differ with you, but I do believe that this revolution, this feministic revolution for freedom, will go down to history as the revolution in Iran that broke the backs of the mullahs, that broke the backs of the oppressors. This is the revolution that will lead to more freedom, more dignity, more human rights, more democracy.
That's right. You've spoken of a revolution, and that's what's happening in Iran. But, you know, women in Iran been deprived of even the basic human and civil rights for decades now by a regime that has openly discriminated against them and even regard women as just 50% of the male counterparts. So would you agree that the anger of the Iranian women is not just limited to hijab, like you mentioned, but also the unrest has opened floodgates to tell the stories of years of repression and discrimination?
Well, I do believe, I'm a liberal myself, so I don't believe in religious politics. I don't believe in getting mixed, having the mix between politics and religion, because how do you argument against God? You can't. I mean, no matter what this God has, what name this God has. What we have here is our life on earth, and how we organize society should be based on human rights and on ideologies and not religions. Because our common challenges that we are facing, you cannot read a verse from a holy book to meet, but you need logic solutions to these problems and challenges that we have. So, I mean, their demands for freedom also is not new. The feministic women movement in Iran is over 100 years old. So the oppression of the men, the patriarchy against the women in Iran is also older than the Islamic Republic. But it has culminated now because it has focused on the women, and the men in this regime have been wanting to decide and to limit the scope of what a woman is and how should she behave, what she should wear, how she should eat, what she should study, and all of that. And also the civil rights of women in a marriage. When it comes to parenthood, all of these issues, they have to be civil based and not religious based, no matter what their religion is.
And like you mentioned, if we talk about just the last 40 years, we've seen an active movement go underway in Iran, where these women have taken to streets repeatedly to fight this regime. Now, the world too has shown solidarity with the Iranian women. Many countries have officially called out the Iranian regime. Canada, for example, has in fact pressed some sanctions as well. So far, how do you see the support of the international community coming in? Does the world need to be louder, you think?
Yes. I mean, enough with the mumbling, enough with the press releases. Now we have to take concrete actions. I do believe that every chief of government has to call upon the ambassador of Iran in their country and to tell them that this is not acceptable, and in worst case scenario also close the Iranian embassy in that country. That is the first thing that we can do, that we have on national level. Secondly, here in the European Union, we can also call for all foreign affairs ministers and have together a common European position. We can also start with confiscating and freezing the assets of the men who are in close contact or working for the morality police and the Iranian regime. We can further also look at the sanctions. We can also further look at the UN responsibility to protect mechanism. There are so many tools in our toolbox that we can use who are within the international law frame, but I don't know why these governments around the globe are hesitating, as if the Iranian women have not given enough sacrifice.
Okay, you talk about the response of the international community. In fact, in India as well, a similar fight has been brewing. It's a fight for wearing hijab, and it's even in the top court of the country. I request you to stay on with us. I also want to introduce Sahira Hassan, activist, joining us. How do you look at what's happening in Iran? Because now we are seeing women who have come out in the open. It's a revolution that's happening against hijab, because clearly in Iran, hijab is not a choice.
Yes, of course, whatever happened with Amini, I condemn in a strong word, because I tell you very clearly that it is not written in any book of Islam that you impose religious teaching or preaching by beating women, by dragging women. So it is anti-Islamic also. Okay,
Ms. Hassan, but how do you see this vis-a-vis what happened in India? A couple of months ago, we saw how the protests over the right to wear a hijab broke out, specifically if we talk about the state of Karnataka. And back then, a lot of support came in for those who wanted to wear a hijab, those who were, contesting the very idea of mandating a hijab, saying that this is a female's choice, this is a woman's choice, and it's being hampered with. Wow, how do you see this vis-a-vis what's happening in Iran? Tahira Hassan.
Yes, please repeat the question, because I couldn't see there was some disturbance.
No, just meaning to ask you, how do you see the movement that is currently underway in Iran for the last so many days vis-a-vis what happened in India, specifically in Karnataka a couple of months ago? Is this really a freedom of choice? Do you think so here in India as well?
Cannot. This India, we are the largest democracy that is run by the constitution. So we can fight here for the right of choice, but their Sharia rule is there. But that's why I clarified it, that even in the Islam, it is not written in any book that you beat women, drag women for imposing religious preaching. So the two are different. And it's a women's prerogative to decide whether she wants to wear hijab or not.
Okay, but the issue being that it's being fought as a choice, but clearly in several of the cases it's not a choice. It's something that's being, imposed. Let me go across to Abir Al-Sahlani, who is with us even now, because we're talking about the kind of role that the international community can play in effectively helping the Iranian women. Remember, the entire world has now stood up in solidarity with the Iranian women. So, I ask this, even as we speak, more and more Iranians are being subjected to brute force of the state. So how exactly is the international community expected to react? This is what I want to ask you. In an effective way, what can be done, in what can be now called a humanitarian crisis?
Well, I mean, first, we can start with the freezing and confiscating the assets of the Iranian regime outside Iran. This will starve the morality police, and that will be a very clear signal that they cannot continue on doing that. Secondly, we have to look at the sanctions. How can we make it possible for internet companies to provide alternative connections to internet? Because at the moment, the journalists, international journalists, are prohibited from entering Iran. And we need to have a second narrative, not only the narrative of the regime and the Mullah regime in Iran. We need a second narrative. We need the women's narrative to come out to the people and those who are protesting as well. And that's why working on alternative connection to internet is of utter importance at the moment. This is what we can do right now, right here. And on a longer perspective, I think that the UN have to consider the possibility of intervening with boots on the ground. But that is on the long term, if the regime continues with its bloody attacks on these protesters, on these women who are meeting the morality police and the police forces, the so-called protectors of citizens, with their own bodies as a shield. They don't have any weapons. They don't have anything to meet these violent police.
So you're essentially asking for a greater international intervention. I also want to ask you, we've seen how Iranian activists call hijab a symbol of repression, but there are Muslim women around the world who embrace it and consider it a part of religious identity. How do you see hijab? What's your personal view?
I mean, I am not wearing the hijab apparently, so I don't believe in it. But I do believe, as a liberal, as a woman coming from that region myself, that is utter importance. It is the most important thing that women decide for themselves what they want to wear. I'm, as a legislator or a chief of the government or a police, I don't have a say about how women dress. It has to be a personal choice. It has to be protected by a constitution that every citizen in every country, they choose for themselves how to dress and what to believe in or what not to believe in.
Okay, all right. But, the contrast is that in India, it's not a complete ban on hijab we're looking at. It's only a section of the students who want to wear the hijab inside the classrooms where uniforms have been prescribed. But, of course, that battle continues in the Supreme Court. The contrast not lost on anyone. It's Abir and Tahira Hassan. Thank you for joining us on the broadcast.